we'll start with this per post from Boxing Uncut by way of Instagram, which reads, caught up on the most recent installment of the 3 Knockdown Rule with Steve Kim and Mario Lopez, and from what I heard, it sounds like Virgil Ortiz could be facing Mean Machine next this summer. If it goes down, it'll be a great step up in competition, possibly the last step up before Virgil gets a title shot. And I have to agree with Boxing Uncut. You know, after Virgil Ortiz's last fight, the fight with Maurice Hooker, there's a lot of Crawford talk, you know. Virgil wants Crawford. Maybe he does, but I told you then what I'm about to tell you now. Maybe Virgil Ortiz does want Crawford. That's the fighter in him. But as far as what his handlers want,
no,
it might be something else entirely.
No.
Maybe they don't put him in there with Crawford just yet.
No.
Maybe they put him in there with someone who Crawford fought, a common opponent between them.
Sí.
Someone like Kavaliauskas,
Sí.
the Mean Machine. I like the idea of that fight. It's a good fight. Virgil Ortiz is of very generous proportions in a welterweight division. Kind of guy that could see himself moving up to 154 pounds someday, and doing well. The same applies to Kavaliauskas, the Mean Machine. This is not a little guy as far as welterweights go. I mean, I know that they all might look the same size from the comfort of your own home on your TV screen, but Kavaliauskas is a decent-sized guy as far as welterweights go. Bigger guy than Danny Garcia, bigger guy than Keith Thurman, bigger guy than Sean Portier. He's on the bigger end of the spectrum as far as welterweights go, the same way that Errol Spence Jr. is on the bigger end of the spectrum as far as welterweights go. And Egas can punch. I know that knockdown in the Terence Crawford fight was ruled a slip, but let's be honest, that was a knockdown. That's what that was. And I don't hold that against Terence Crawford. These things happen. Kavaliauskas doesn't have a huge promotional engine behind him. He doesn't have the notoriety that some other fighters have. But the reality of it is, he's still an interesting player in today's welterweight division.
He is.
He still is a formidable fighter. He only has one recorded loss on his entire resume, a loss to Terence Crawford, and there's no shame in that. I'd very much like to see Kavaliauskas lock horns with Virgil Ortiz. Solid step-up fight, you know. Virgil Ortiz is a guy who I think is more cut out to carry the Golden Boy Promotions banner into the next generation.
Yeah.
More so than some others. I mean, we're always hearing about Ryan Garcia. We're always talking about Ryan Garcia, but the reality of Ryan is he pulled out of a very interesting fight. That won't be the first time that's happened. This is a guy who's saying he's going to retire at 26 years old. He did say that. This is a guy who's saying that he's dealing with anxiety issues, and that ain't good news any way you slice it. Now, I don't believe Ryan, and I've said that many times. I think it's all bullshit. I think it's just an excuse to pull out of a fight that he might feel is more trouble than it's worth. But whether you believe him or not, either way, it don't bode well for Ryan. If you believe him, and he's a guy who actually has anxiety issues, well, that can't be a good thing for a boxer that's got to deal with the pressures of being a boxer and winning fights and fighting in front of a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot on the line, titles, things of that nature. Having an anxiety issue? No, it's not good. Now, if it's bullshit, the way I think it's bullshit, all that means is that he doesn't have the intestinal fortitude for the big nights, for the big fights. And either way, it means the same thing. I don't know that Ryan really is cut out to carry Golden Boy Promotions into the next generation. He might not be built for it. But Virgil strikes me as a salt-of-the-earth kind of kid. He plays the guitar. He's fucking awesome.
He's great.
Tells jokes on his Twitter account. I love him.
Awesome.
And he's a fighter through and through. I mean, he's kind of like Jose Ramirez. Real salt-of-the-earth guy.
Yeah.
Good guy.
Yeah.
I like the guy. And I think he's actually more cut out to give the boxing fans the kind of fights they want to see than Ryan. Because at the end of the day, Ryan's social media following and all that is.
Whatever.
You know, those aren't all boxing fans that are following him. I think for the most part, those aren't boxing fans that are following him. They're fans of him, and they'll probably still be his fans after he leaves the sport of boxing. Maybe they will. But, you know, I just feel like Virgil's got more grit than Ryan. I feel like Virgil is more cut out to really go far in the sport. I mean, I just don't find myself questioning if Virgil Ortiz really wants fights. I believe he does. Maybe his handlers don't want to rush him into anything. And you know, maybe Golden Boy doesn't either. But I think that he the fighter, he wants fights. Virgil Ortiz versus Kavaliauskas is a mouth-watering fucking fight. And I hope it goes down this summer.
If it doesn't.
I'll tell you something. Now, Mean Machine's not with Top Rank anymore. He's a network and promotional free agent. The same applies to unbeaten welterweight contender from Kazakhstan, Deniar Yelusinov. We talked about him previous video. He's not with Matchroom anymore. I'd like to see a fight between them. I mean, there's a situation going on at 147 pounds. To where the one fight we've been asking for many, many years, we're not going to get it. In all likelihood, we're not going to get it, at least not in the near future. I mean, right now, Errol Spence Jr. is supposed to fight Manny Pacquiao, which is a good fight. It's a big fight. It has its own level of intrigue, but it's really not the same thing as Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford. That's, two prime welterweights in their prime, still in their prime, both world champions. I'm just so sick of waiting for that fight, I don't care anymore. There's so many politics going on at 147. That most of the top-tier welterweights are on the PBC side of things, and it's been this way for the longest time. Yet there's this whole other gang of welterweights that aren't with the PBC. Igor Kavaliauskas, Deniar Yelusinov, Blair Cobbs. David Avanesian just beat the fucking brakes out of her Josh Kelly. And you know what? You could make fights between those fucking guys, and I'd be more interested than continually dealing with the situation created by the PBC and Top Rank. I'm done with it. I don't care anymore. At this point, I just want to see some fucking fights. And if you give me Mean Machine versus Yelusinov, or Yelusinov versus Blair Cobbs, or Blair Cobbs versus David Avanesian,
I'll take it.
I'll take it. Because there's this misconception, this prevailing theory, that the only fights to make at 147 pounds, the only fights worth watching, only involve what?
Same 4 guys.
3-4 guys? Look, Keith Thurman hasn't fought since the Pacquiao fight. That's roughly 2 years ago, close to it. Danny Garcia says he's going up to 154, so he's out. Sean, well, he's not fighting Crawford. Doesn't seem to be fighting Errol again. Errol's fighting Manny. Crawford, God knows what the fuck they're going to do with him. It's a tired conversation. There are other fights with other fighters at 147 pounds that could be very entertaining that don't involve the politics. So I want to see those fights.
Yeah, I'm not going to go cry in the shower over Crawford versus Spence.
Or Porter versus Crawford or any of that shit. It's a tired conversation. I mean, it really is. Who the fuck really wants to sit around talking about the politics all the time? There's all these other welterweights out there that could be fighting, and I want to see them fight. I want to see them in action. In other news, light heavyweight Marcus Browne's trainer says, we want Artur Beterbiev next.
What, a trip to the hospital?
Our advisors are talking about Beterbiev right now, and we're ranked number 1 for him. Anyway, Stark told BoxingScene.com. We want that fight next, so we're just waiting for what manager Al Heyman comes up with. Browne, who is coming off a 12-round victory over Denis Grachev on April 20th at the Shrine Exposition Center in Los Angeles, his first fight since his upset loss to Jean Pascal in 2019, Browne lost on a technical decision after getting dropped several times. Pascal recently tested positive for a cocktail of PEDs ahead of his previously scheduled rematch against Badu Jack. Stark says Beterbiev, who owns the IBF and WBC titles, has been at the top of their target list for a while now and is not bothered about the Russian's outside reputation as a dangerous mauler. Beterbiev has yet to go to distance in any professional fight. Yeah, he's a monster, Stark admitted, but it's for the world title, so we'll have to train super hard and get the best version of Marcus to come out. Hope they realize that we're number 1 for that belt, and that they go by the sanction and body rules, said Stark. I don't think Beterbiev has faced the number 1 ranked fighter in a couple of years, so he needs to step up and fight the number 1, so that would be Marcus. I'm just hoping that we get the Beterbiev fight, added Stark. We need that right now. Marcus is ready right now. Let's go. I'm not even gonna question whether or not Stark or Browne really want this fight. I don't have to, because I'm not against the fight. If Marcus and his team really want Artur Beterbiev, I'm not against them getting him.
Get him.
I don't think it would end well for Marcus because I don't think he's got the chin for it. I just don't. Marcus Browne has had a reputation for some time now, since the Hot Rod fight many years ago. The Kavaliauskas fight, as being a capable boxer, crafty, skilled southpaw, but chinny. So what do you think happens when you put a chinny guy in there with another guy who's got the reputation for being the biggest puncher in the entire division? If this were Artur Beterbiev coming off a long layoff, then maybe you could give Marcus some decent odds. But Artur has already shaken off the cobwebs with Adam Dionise in a fight where he didn't look his best, though that could be the ring rust he was shaking off.
Yeah.
Bottom line, I'm not against Marcus getting the fight. I just don't know that he will. I don't know that he will because, Artur's on the Top Rank side of things. And their Top Rank's plan for Artur is to unify titles with Joe Smith Jr., Joe Smith of Long Island, newly crowned WBO champion. There's a genuine possibility that plan goes
Uninterrupted.
into action uninterrupted. There's a possibility. However,
What?
there is a chance that Joe Smith Jr. makes one more ring appearance before going into that Beterbiev fight, as there are talks right now of a potential Danny Jacobs versus Joe Smith Jr. New York showdown. Danny Smith, Daniel Jacobs, who has since reunited with his longtime trainer Andre Rosier after stinking out the place against Gabriel Rosario. Danny wants the fight. Joe Smith Jr. has confirmed an offer has been made for the fight. He's receptive to the fight. He wants the fight. And the question now is, will Top Rank stand in the way of that? If they decide to let Joe take the fight, it being that it's a multi-million-dollar offer for Joe, Joe might fight Danny en route to Artur, at which point maybe Artur will decide to take care of Marcus. I don't know. I mean, Marcus and his trainer, they're saying they're number one for one of Artur's belts, but
There's no order.
there's no mandating Artur Beterbiev to take care of any mandatory challenges. So even though Marcus is number one right now, until that mandate comes down, Artur has wiggle room.
For now?
Once again, I'm not against the fight. I'm not against Marcus getting his shot. I'm not against Artur defending his titles against Marcus. It's a situation that might have some friction. Will Al Heyman and the people over there at the PBC allow Marcus Browne to cross the street over there to Top Rank to have that fight? Because, Artur's the reigning champion. He calls the shots. He gets the lion's share of the pot. You want to go challenging that guy for what he's got, you've got to go to him. That is until a mandate comes down, and if a mandate comes down and a deal can't be reached, then it goes to a purse bid, and the highest bidder bids on the fight, wins the fight, hosts the fight.
That's it.
Those are the wheels that would have to go in motion until, something happens. But I reiterate, if Joe Smith Jr., by some chance, ends up keeping busy with Daniel Jacobs over the summer, and Artur wants to squeeze another fight in before the unification match, he can so decide to take care of Marcus voluntarily, as to not allow Marcus to become a potential hindrance in the future. A la Triple G versus Camille Zeremata, who he was not ordered to fight.
He wasn't
ordered to fight that guy, but what they did was they petitioned the IBF to qualify him as a mandatory challenger to keep their schedule free moving forward, which they did. I mean, look, there's a lot of ways this could break down, but I reiterate, I'm not against Artur taking care of Marcus if Joe ends up fighting with Danny. I'm not against either of those scenarios, either of those fights. They could go straight into the unification match, or they can have interim fights, title defenses beforehand. I'm not against it.
Do you think Marcus stands a chance?
I do think he stands a chance. I think he stands a very good chance of being knocked out by Artur Beterbiev. I do. And finally, on June 27th, we got a battle of the unbeatens by way of PBC Island, by way of the PBC. You've got unbeaten Morrell versus unbeaten Cazarez, going down at 168 pounds. I'll tell you that, David Morrell's people, they must be pretty fucking confident in that guy putting him in this situation when he only has 4 professional fights. For those of you that are not aware, David Morrell is in possession of the WBA baby belt at 168 pounds, the regular title.
The Canelo Alvarez's super title.
You all know how much the PBC loves those WBA baby belts, those regular titles, which afford them the opportunity to try to pass their fights off as championship fights, even when they're not for full championship titles, but are still. David Morrell versus Mario Cazarez is a interesting situation because here you have David Morrell. He's only got 4 professional fights, 7 years younger than Mario Cazarez. David is 23, Mario was 30. Mario's got 3 times as many fights as David. Though that ain't saying much because
Against who?
Mario's quality of competition for the most part is mostly pedestrian, outside of that win over Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Very uninspiring, very uninspired Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Mario Cazarez, this guy,
Who's this guy?
biggest name he's fought so far is a very uninspired Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. And we all know how dedicated he is to the sport of boxing, right?
Right.
But that's his biggest win so far. He did manage to make a bit of a splash with that, because nobody knew Mario at that time, but they did know Julio. Come to find out, Mario Cazarez holds an amateur win over none other than Canelo Alvarez. And he's been running around telling every man, woman, his dog, his goldfish, and his cat about that amateur win, because as a professional, he hasn't really done much. Not that long ago, he said he'd punch the freckles off Canelo Alvarez and force him to pick those freckles up off the floor. Good shit talking. If I do say so myself, though I think he's a ways out from a Canelo Alvarez fight. I don't think this guy's on Canelo Alvarez's radar. I'm not even sure that Canelo Alvarez knows who this man is. Better still, Mario's had a lot of guys' names in his mouth. Not limited to calling out Canelo. I vaguely recall hearing him call out David Benavidez, I think. And if my memory serves me, he's in the right place to try and get that fight. Now, I don't know what the fuck that fight would mean to David at this point, but for Mario, it would be an opportunity to fight someone worth talking about, fight someone of note. He's just got to get through David Morrell. Not sure that he will.
Not sure that he won't.
But you know, Mario's been shooting off at the mouth quite a bit. He's got a lot of people's names in his mouth. And it's about time he started building some kind of a resume. The same applies to David Morrell, though David's not under as much pressure as Mario because David's only 23 years old and he's only got 4 fights. So how much pressure are you supposed to put on him? Whereas Mario's 12 professional fights, but he's 30 fucking years old. If you're gonna make something happen, you need to make it happen now. It's time for this guy to start building some kind of a resume. And the saving grace here is that regardless of who wins the fight, David, Mario, pick who you like, there's names on that side of the street for those guys to fight, you know? Anthony Durrell, Caleb Truax.
David Benavidez.
Maybe Ronald Ellis or Romer Angulo. Somebody like that?
After David Benavidez beats the brakes off of Jose Uzcategui.
Maybe the winner of this fight can fight that guy, because the whole idea here is David Morrell's in a place where he's actually building his professional resume, and the same applies to Mario Cazarez with a bit more urgency, because Mario ain't no fucking spring chicken. He's 30 years old, he's only got 12 professional fights. You want to call out the Canelo Alvarez's and their David Benavidez's of the world?
Need a little bit more meat with those potatoes, sweetheart.
June 27th. We'll see what happens.